Coogs House. The Big 12 gave us all a great Valentine's Day gift this weekend. A de facto championship game for the Houston Cougars?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougars. We're joining the conversation, but you don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below if you're a milk chocolate person or a dark chocolate person or a no chocolate person, whatever the case may be, let us know. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have more on that fun later. I want to talk about Houston, Arizona today. I want to talk about what's going to happen Saturday and the matchups. But I also want to reiterate a lot about these Wildcats of Arizona are just kind of a little wild. And I think they're very aptly named. So as I look at them, they're a team that's weirdly struggled with a lot of top 10 opponents, a lot of top 25 opponents, but finds themselves ranked at number 10 in the net. They're 7-7 against quad one teams. That's all 7 of their losses coming against quad one teams. For reference, Houston's 5-3, right? They hadn't played as many of them. You've seen some of those quad one games for Houston get bumped into quad twos. We talked about that before, though, right? They beat West Virginia so bad they bumped back a quad, which ultimately kind of sunk that a little bit. But Arizona did play 5 non-conference Power 4 teams. I say non-conference kind of almost in air quotes, actually, and I probably should have done the actual on the screen here because West Virginia was an early game for them and technically non-conference. They played them in Atlantis back over Thanksgiving break, but they were 0-5 in those 4 non-conference Power 4 games if you include the West Virginia game. And in conference, things have been kind of the flipped script. They're 11-2. Losses are understandably at Texas Tech, tough place to play, and at a hot Kansas State team this week. I guess they nearly lost at home to Iowa State, but they forced overtime with a 3-quarter court heave from Caleb Love. Arizona, I guess, could easily be 10-3 if they don't make that shot, but on the whole, very respectable record in conference, whereas their non-conference record, you lose to everyone that's any good you play, right? And so that balance is kind of tough to navigate. I think it's interesting too. They play. I thought when watching them play a couple times on YouTube, they play fast, but I was surprised to look at analytics and synergy stats at how much faster they're playing than the average college basketball team. It didn't strike me as that way. But analytically speaking, they're getting a shot up in 16.3 seconds. They play the 37th fastest tempo in all of Division I college basketball. It's 360 teams or whatever, right? I mean, they're pushing the pace a lot. And I think what's interesting is this kind of makes a styles and fights type of contest here, right? Because Houston's the exact opposite. They want to grind it out. They want possessions to take over 18 seconds. They want to force you to work into the shot clock. And Houston can score quickly if they have to, right? Yeah, quick actions. Kelvin Sampson runs an NBA-style offense, right? But defensively, they grind you, make you work for that 4th, 5th, 6th shot, potentially later in the shot clock. And so that as far as styles and fights go, I think the other thing that stuck out to me is Arizona weirdly plays everyone they play against, a very 2-point focused game. That's say they score twos, and the way to beat them is also scoring twos. In January and February, I felt like they did a lot of their games in Big 12 play have been played at the rim. Kansas State had some early success against them with big to big drops. So getting into the high post, he has an immediate feed high low or 2 dribbles and then a entry past the post and a late seal, that kind of stuff. I really think that plays into Juwan's hands very well. Juan is an excellent passer, and he's getting better at creating offense. I think you're going to see him in that 15-foot area a lot as a centerpiece in this game, especially when we get to the matchups, depending on who's in the game for Arizona as well. They make some adjustments where they maybe give some space to kind of get more passing lane, maybe protect the basket, don't go at the low post, get the ball, whatever. And against Kansas State, they meant that Nagesan guy, he just started going right by the help side and taking himself as an isolation player from that same high post. Stop me if you've heard this before, but Jawan Roberts wants to get to his left hand in those situations, and it looked really easy for Kansas State to do that. Kansas State beat Arizona 46 points in the paint, and I thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, that's it. That's the secret, is score a bunch of points in the paint. And I went through and in all 7 of Arizona's losses, they've actually outscored their opponent in the paint in all but 2 of them. And you start paying attention, Arizona is top 15 in the country in 2-point field goals made, but 295th in the country in made 3-point field goals. They're 300th in the country in 3-point field goal percentage. And if you look at the shot charts on synergy stats, stuff like that, where they grow based on how frequent they're taking them and whatever on the bubble charts, and they're all down inside of 10 to 15 feet. They want to play at the rim, and teams that have been able to beat them at their own game are rare. But honestly, that's how Kansas State, I would argue, won. But teams that beat them at the rim are not easy to come by. They do a great job of slashing. They play through forwards a lot. They play off the glass a lot. Pretty decent rebounding team there at Arizona. Really athletic, like big, strong, fast, athletic, explosive, athletic, all those kinds of things. And they use all that to play a very at the rim style of basketball. I mentioned rebounding there. And total rebounds are like top 30 in the country. Rebounding percentage, they're still pretty high. Not quite as high as Houston, but still pretty high, right? And so that kind of shapes up the way this athleticism plays out. I will say that because I'm saying all that, what's going to happen is someone's going to get hot from 3 for them. If they get hot from 3, they're a really tough out because they already have so much success at the rim. If they add a layer to what you have to cover, makes it pretty challenging, right? So only one guy on their team's attempted over 100 threes this year, and he's actually closer to 2. Caleb Love's at 188. He shoots about 30% from 3-point line. So that 30% is a weird number. He can go 4 for 5. He can go 1 for 5. It just kind of depends on the day. I think Houston's got to prepare for him like he's shooting 4 for 5 and adjust off that, obviously. And Kelvin Sampson's comments on Thursday made you believe he understands the kind of daunting challenge that Caleb Love brings. Outside of him, Anthony Dell'Orso, I think I pronounced that right. It's a very Italian looking with an apostrophe in the middle, Dell'Orso. He started the last 15 games for them. He came off the bench before that. He's shooting 42% from 3 on 3.5 attempts per game. I wonder if he'd be closer to Caleb Love in total attempts if he'd started the first part of the year, obviously. And I don't want to say this to make like you don't cover the other guys, but Dell'Orso is the only guy I'm like, you can't lose him, right? We can't live with him getting lost coming off of threes and stuff like that. And they know that too, right? They're going to run him off of stuff and everything else. Everybody else, though, it's really catch and rack, catch, go to the rim, catch and attack, see if you can get some free throws. They shoot free throws a pretty high total number as well. Their percentage is, I guess, top 30. It's 77%, right? But they're really good at getting to the rim relative to other teams in college basketball. And I think that's, again, a fact, like breaks off of how well they attack off the bounce. And so it's going to be a lot of guard to yard kind of matchup stuff. And that, I think, makes me want to jump into the second segment, I guess, already and talk some about how those matchups are going to go. But before we get to all that, it is an episode brought to you by Factor Meals. Now, if you're looking for an opportunity to optimize your nutrition this year, Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. 40 options across 8 dietary preferences for every week. You can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, calorie smart, protein plus keto, etc. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled throughout the day. when you're teaching and coaching and podcasting and watching a lot of basketball, it's nice to have that kind of stuff ready for you at home. Trust me on that one. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. And I really mean minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off. Use code lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's Locked On College 50 off at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box at Factor. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs, about Houston and Arizona meeting in a de facto kind of 1 versus 2 midseason Big 12 championship game kind of atmosphere in Arizona this weekend. A lot of stars on the floor in this one, college basketball stars, guys that have been around the block a little bit. And so the matchups get kind of fun. The matchup to watch, though, is going to be that point guard battle. It's certainly not like guard battle. I say point guard battle, the guard battle between Caleb Love and Milos Uzan. Now, I say guard battle because Caleb Love being a point guard is kind of he's just a guard. He'll start the offense, he'll initiate the offense, he'll catch and shoot, he'll run off screens. He does all the things for them. Caleb Love is their go-to guy in every single aspect. 15.8 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists per game. And honestly, that assist number feels low, but generally, like with how much they drive, dribbling it a second time typically kills the assist of the first and not. Caleb sounds familiar. It's not just the heave earlier this season to help them beat Iowa State. They got him on SportsCenter. Fifth-year guy, was at Carolina when they knocked off Coach Krzyzewski and Duke, was kind of all over the screen when that storyline was playing out. For what it's worth, he was also the last ever Pac-12 Player of the Year for Arizona. Last year, he won Pac-12 Player of the Year. He was an all-ACC freshman when he was at North Carolina. This guy's the constant threat to score. He's getting all of the shots. I want to say, I don't mean that pejoratively, but it makes their offense very predictable. He's getting 14 and a half attempts per game from the field and also shooting just over 3 free throws. Their next highest field goal attempts per game is Jaden Bradley at 8.8, right? So that's like a solid 6 more shots per game coming from him than any other single player on Arizona. And frankly, that number gets kind of watered down. You factor in they have a bunch of non-power four, non-conference games early in the year where he doesn't play the full 40 minutes, right? He plays about 34 minutes per game. Again, you bump that up for a conference game, especially when this magnitude. He's going to be doing a lot. At 6'4", I think Uzan's the best option to guard him. Pretty thick frame, long enough wingspan to determine to distract him. And I think Uzan's grown into such a great he was a good defender coming in. I think he's grown into a great defender. I think he's the natural matchup there, which means Jaden Bradley, the other guard, I guess probably technically would fit you more of a point guard role because when Caleb is off the ball and not bringing it up to initiate offense, Jaden Bradley's the guy orchestrating things. He's 6'3". If his name is familiar, it's because he was at Alabama as a freshman and was in the bench unit at Alabama that came in and beat Houston. Y'all remember that game a couple years ago where Houston was up and then they brought in the bench guys, Nate Oates did, and they just ran like a different offense than Houston had seen. They kind of chipped away and got back at it. Brandon Miller was on that team. Brandon Miller did like nothing against Houston, but the bench guys really kind of saved the game for Alabama. They came back and won in Fertitta. One of the only times anyone's ever won in Fertitta. It's 7 times is all. And Jaden Bradley was in that bench group. He transferred to Arizona. Was a bench guy last year as well, but was a starting guard this year for them. I think he's an LJ Cryer matchup. Now, when I look at what Jaden Bradley does, he's the next most field goal attempts guy. So I understand some people might be not so quick to put LJ Cryer on him. But I think the deal is athletically, he's a guy that Cryer can keep up with. Again, he's only 6'3", so it's not like Cryer's like really small next to him or anything like that. And frankly, I think we've seen a scrappier version of LJ Cryer in the last 6 or 8 weeks. If LJ Cryer is playing like that, I think he wins this matchup, right? And we know what LJ is going to do on offense, even with the bum pinky. If he can if he can control the Jaden Bradley matchup on the defensive end, I think we're okay. Their third perimeter guy is that Anthony DeLorso guy I told you about that shoots it pretty well. He's listed at 6'6". He's a third-year guy. He was at Campbell, really small school. Just sometimes see pop up in March kind of stuff. He's a shooter, and he is a movement shooter. He is a catch-and-shoot shooter. He is a guy you cannot let get loose. Again, 42% on 3.5 attempts per game. I wonder, again, if he'd gotten some run early in the season before and had to work his way in as a transfer guy, right? If he'd gotten that run, I wonder if he'd have a more authentic look at his stats, because in January, February, he's been pretty solid for them from behind the arc. They've started the last 2 games, a guy named Carter Bryant at the power forward. He's a 6'8" freshman, really athletic, makes really freshman plays. I believe they're going to start Trey Townsend, though, at that spot. Trey Townsend started the previous 22 games, got a concussion. I think he's cleared protocol. If he's cleared protocol and able to play, I don't know why you wouldn't start him if you're Tommy Lloyd over there at Arizona. He's a big, like, bruiser type. He's 6'6", 215, runs, jumps, strong, dives on the floor. He is like, he will pull from 3 on occasion. I guess he's like JoJo Tugler in that way almost. But he's not the shooter type. He is the offensive rebound putback type. He is the dive on the floor, kick it ahead, leads the break with it from his backside kind of type. And hence, and unfortunately, some of that, tough play guy with concussion, he had missed a couple games. I think he's the Jawan Roberts matchup. He'll, again, kind of be there, like, heart and soul and an effort kind of way that way. I mean, everything goes through Caleb Love, but I think they feed off his energy in a weird way. That's kind of hard to quantify, which means that the other big guy, Tobe Awaka, that's the JoJo Tugler matchup. Now, Awaka is a great matchup for Tugler in that they're both about 6'8". They both have really long arms. No one has longer arms than JoJo Tugler, but Tugler's arms Awaka's arms are pretty long wingspan guy. The difference that works for Awaka is he's 250 pounds, right? He's a big, strong, long-armed guy. Played a couple years at Tennessee under Rick Barnes out there. I think the advantage for Tugler in that matchup, well, he's given up about 25, 30, maybe even 35 pounds. I think that Tugler's a lot more finished basketball player, a lot more complete basketball player. And Tugler's not a traditional back-to-the-basket post guy or anything like that, but he's pretty solid inside of 6 or 8 feet with the basketball. I think that still falls to Tugler as far as matchup win, but Awaka is really good. Awaka is one of 2 guys I think I see on this team that would be very much a guy that fits in with the Houston Cougars. The other one is KJ Lewis. KJ Lewis comes off the bench for them. He is all energy all the time. That dude's built like he's 6'4" and a half, 6'5". He lives at 6'5". I think he's closer to 6'4", so I'm going to say 6'4" and a half. When I watch him play, KJ Lewis is a DFW kid. From, maybe that's why I think he's a Houston Cougars from Texas, but the dude's built like a linebacker and kind of plays like one too. You saw one in your local intramural league. The guy that just like is super, super physical and like uses all his physical ability to get to the rim. Lewis is just a sophomore, which I was surprised in looking at him. The dude looks like a 24-year-old man. Again, 6'4" and a half. 210, 215, played at, Duncanville, a big program in DFW. He uses all that size and athleticism. There'll be times where he looks like the quickest guy on the floor. There'll be times where he looks like the most explosive guy on the floor. They're playing at home, so he'll probably have a gigantic dunk. He's big, strong, fast in every kind of way, but he uses it to play really hard. And I think that's why he sticks out to me as a guy that Sampson would love to have too. And anytime you see a couple Sampson guys on the other side of the floor, or guys that could play for Kelvin from a style of play kind of way, it's always like, oh man, that could be in for a real fight. Now, I mentioned across the starters, I think Houston wins most of those matchups by slim margins. The interesting thing here will be how the benches go. Because I mentioned KJ Lewis, he and Terrence Arsenal matchup is very different guys that are both very, like, genuinely Houston Cougars in how they play, even though they're both technically very different in how they play. But they're both going to be a fun matchup as far as when they both come in the game at that U16. Maybe one of them waits to close to the U12 timeout, something like that. But they'll both be impactful in this game. And frankly, if the starters come out to be a wash, the KJ Lewis Terrence Arsenal matchup could win the game in a lot of ways, right? The biggest thing working for Houston is, I think, while the backcourt guys, Lewis and Arsenault, could be almost considered a wash, Houston's bench brings in Javier Francis, and if Javier stays out of foul trouble, he might have the biggest impact on either bench because they don't really bring a big off the bench that helps them like Javier helps Houston. Now, he's kind of functionally a sixth starter. He started some games earlier this year, and so I know that's kind of a gift. Their best bench big there in Arizona is Henry Vesar. I was correct on that pronunciation this week. Vesar, big 7-footer from Estonia. And I don't want to make him sound unathletic because he is more athletic, I think, than he looks like in the warm-up lines. When he's a 7-foot guy walking around from Estonia, he looks a little stiff, right? But he's gonna have trouble keeping up, I think, with some of these guys from Houston. He's much bigger, so he might make up for it and prove me wrong. I think just athletically, he's gonna have trouble keeping up with some of the guys Houston rolls out at him. I think that might impact his minutes too. When they play big teams, Texas Tech has Toppin, or Kansas State rolls out a couple true bigs. He gets like 30 minutes. When they play like Iowa State, that game went to overtime and he played 16, right? So I think that's going to be kind of what you're looking at here. Now, I've already kind of alluded to what I think is going to happen and some things like that, but I want to get into it in 1 second. But first, I got to remind you today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, as the NBA is tipping off with the All-Star game this weekend, stuff like that, season kind of feels like it's just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action at the start than FanDuel. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. If you miss some opening tip-off action or whatever, you can bet in the fourth quarter, come back. You can stay in on it all game long through their app. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine those live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, FanDuel is offering new customers $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a shot $150 back in bonus bets. That first bet hits. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Parker Ranger locked on Coogs here, and I'm looking at Houston, Arizona, and this feels like Big 12 championship-y kind of game for Houston. It's 1 versus 2 in the standings in the Big 12. Houston is 12-1 in conference. Arizona is 11-2 in conference. I would argue that Arizona had a little bit easier first half of the conference slate. That's not for here or there. I think both teams have pretty challenging back half of the conference slates, and that's how they meet in Arizona this weekend. Arizona hasn't lost back-to-back conference games under Tommy Lloyd, and they lost to Kansas State earlier this week, right? They've only lost back-to-back games at all once, and it was actually this year. They lost to Oklahoma and then West Virginia in that mid-season tournament thing in Atlantis they played around Thanksgiving. I think Houston makes this game an ugly rock fight, drag it out kind of game. They're playing on the road. It'll be adverse. These two teams don't like each other. Not that they've played each other a lot, but they felt like they got a raw deal where Houston was their 5 seed a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament. Houston remembers that as the game that wore them out, and so then they had no legs when they played Villanova in the Elite Eight. It's a couple years back. I think that was spring of 22. And it's not that there's a whole lot of carryover on the rosters from those teams. I mean, there's 1 or 2 guys per team, right? But the truth is that the fans, I think, recall that season and those years and those teams, because I think both teams thought they had a real shot and real argument to win it all. A great game back in the day. Houston won it in 2022, right? But I think that you're going to see a similar kind of rock fighty, ugly kind of contest here. And I don't mean as a fan of offensive basketball myself. I love X's and O's and plays and things like that. I don't know that X's and O's and plays and things like that matter a whole lot in this one. Arizona is going to be really physical, really athletic, and really try and get the ball inside over and over and over again. Houston's a great defensive team. They're going to pack it in and make you go through bodies to get there, and they'll be ready to take charges. They're ready to contest the rim, do all those things. On offense, I'd imagine Houston tries to grind out possessions and make this a low possession game because then, a low possession game kind of limits how much the athleticism helps the Arizona offense. Um, I really like Ken Palm has this at 68-70, and that almost feels too high scoring to me. I do think it's gonna be that kind of close, but I just don't think it's gonna be that kind of. I think if it gets to 70, it went to overtime, right? I think that's truthfully how the only way this game gets that high. FanDuel's over-unders and that kind of stuff is not out yet at the time of this recording. It's probably out by the time you're listening to this. I think this game is going to be more like 62-60. I think it's going to be low scoring. Basket's going to be at a premium in this one because both teams play that kind of hard. I do think I got Houston coming out on top, even though they're on the road and that functional six-man home court advantage thing can be a big deal, especially Arizona, a real basketball-oriented school, great basketball history there and all that, right? But I just feel like Houston gets it done. They got the talent at a couple spots. We've seen Kelvin Sampson see a guard in their team and take. We've already did Javon Small a couple times this year already, right? I think you can probably have a similar game plan for Caleb Love. Now, don't tell Mountaineer Paul this over Locked On West Virginia, but I think Caleb Love's probably at his best better than Javon Small. So I'm not sure they're going to hold him to 12 points or whatever. I think it was 13 the first time that Houston played West Virginia, but I do think they'll be matchup wise prepared for what Small does. Arizona is better than the team they started this year, so I wouldn't look at those 5 non-con power forward losses as a big deal. It's certainly not indicative of who they are, but I think Houston's got the talent gap in their favor in this one, even though it is slim. Um, and I think truthfully, Houston's a little more tested. And I know that they just lost Kansas State, and that you could argue any loss is a test. But Houston lost to a darn good Tech team, um, you know, through playing above their heads at some levels because of the adversity in front of them. We talked about that one ad nauseum, but go back and check that out if you're from from Arizona and not know what I'm talking about. I also think though that Houston testing themselves in the non-conference in a way that is kind of being undervalued across the country. The other big game on Saturday is Auburn and Alabama. Well, Houston played both those teams really, really well. And I don't know, call me crazy, but if you're going to tell me that Alabama and Auburn are 1 versus 2, and Houston lost to Auburn by 5 in Toyota and lost to Alabama by 5 in overtime in Vegas, I think Houston's got to be considered pretty close to both those programs. I think all 3 teams have gotten better since those weekends in the early part of the season. And I think that's being underappreciated as we look back at how good those teams were. So I'm taking Houston 62-60 in a close one. It's not the most comfortable I've been on any pick I've made. And frankly, I've been really wrong a couple times. So tell me in the comments down below or find me on social media. Tell me what you're thinking about in this one. Social media, I'm at Painsworth512, PAINSWRTH 512 on all forms of social media. Instagram, and I'm also at Painsworth Sports for a sports-specific look at things I'm doing these days. Now, full disclosure, usually we go live right after games. This weekend, we are both in our state, the little private school I teach at and coach at. We're in our little state tournament for a state championship game, potentially Saturday, as well as, unfortunately, having to go to a funeral. I guess we're probably driving to that on Sunday for the funeral Monday. So I don't know exactly when I'm going to be watching this one and going live. So hit subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell so you know when we're going live, and follow me on social media to make sure that you're following along with whatever the latest is. Obviously, frankly, I would like to be talking the Coogs a lot this weekend and make things a little bit easier. But life happens sometimes. But make sure you stay tuned. We'll be talking about all things Houston Cougars each and every week. We'll watch the game. We will recap it. I'm not going to deprive you of that. And frankly, I'd love to talk to you guys about it as soon as I can. As soon as I can get it, I'm going to get it to you as well. Locked On Coogs, the primary Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.